Scott, we often say that the average dynasty player is more experienced, they're better, they're sharper than they were 3 to 5 years ago, certainly 8 years ago. But when it comes to rookies, don't we all revert back to our inner child? And when I say we, it's everybody that plays dynasty.
Yeah, I think we do. We all get excited around rookie season. We all fall in love with players. We all fall in love with the theory of what could happen if a player is correctly drafted to your team, and then you ride them out until they hit that peak value window to where you're inevitably going to want too much to sell them away. Then they're going to be stuck on your roster in 2 years, and somebody is going to say, yeah, that Kadarius Toney, Allen, what a flame out, what a bust. But there was a window. There was a window where if you would have had some discipline, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. There's been many players where we've gone, this isn't the time. And then there is no other time and you get stuck with them. But I would say for the most part, that is how I treat rookies these days. They are more just stocks that I'm trying to project the trajectory. That's an interesting tongue twister there. Project the trajectory.
Say that 10 times fast, right? Yeah.
Project the trajectory of where they are going to go and how I am going to play that stock versus me trying to just say, I know for sure that Will Shipley is going to have opportunity and Braylon Allen isn't. Neither of us know that. We're just making bets on, hey, both of them are behind very good running backs that if the team has it their way, neither of those players will really ever be meaningful, right? But we also know that that doesn't typically happen. There's always players that get opportunity that you never expected. So it's just trying to play the stocks and decide the right times of when to move them, when to buy, when to shift in and out of certain markets. So it's a different game today than it was 5 years ago, where we were just trying to project outcomes, which we are historically terrible at doing.
Yeah, but if you look at you name two running backs that are, fourth round rookie picks in most Superflex dynasty drafts. Now, if you look at someone like Ty Chandler, Khalil Herbert, you could say those guys were, quote, just bad picks, wasted picks. But those guys were life preservers when the Titanic was going down for a lot of teams, right? Like Khalil Herbert was a top 10 running back in actual production, projectable. Like he was startable like 2 or 3 years ago when Montgomery went out. If you held him, if you had a taxi squad or whatever, like that did bail you out. So, we kind of latch onto those things, but maybe that's more true with the running backs rather than with the Cedric Tillman type of wide receivers. So I guess really the whole purpose of this podcast, why I brought you on today, is I want to talk about the types of rookies that end up ruining your team, if there is such a thing. So I say that to you, the types of rookies. What are some of the immediate reactionary thoughts? Is there a type of rookie that we should totally just let somebody else draft?
Well, let's go back to the running back point, because I think we can start there. I think those are actually the easiest ones to assess. You mentioned two names, Ty Chandler and Khalil Herbert. They were day 3 picks where they probably had a very limited window for them to assert themselves as what? Just a usable piece on an NFL team, right? They needed to show early on that they belonged on the depth chart, that they had a chance to earn a role. Now, whether that role ever comes to fruition in your fantasy lineup or whatnot is a different story. But I think that's the scope that I'm viewing almost every running back in the class through. Meaning if I'm drafting Will Shipley, if I'm drafting Ray Davis or Kamani Vidal, sure, it would be nice if they emerge and get an opportunity this year and they are the clear backup and then maybe they're close to as good as the starter in some circumstances. But that's not what I'm aiming for. That's not what you're aiming for when you're drafting those guys. You're not assessing the Eagles' backfield or, to an even bigger degree, the Packers' backfield, right? You hear the narrative on Marshawn Lloyd, just wait till the starter is out of the way. But everything the Packers have done tells you they're never going to plan to just have the starter out of the way, to have Marshawn Lloyd be the starter. It's always going to be some weird committee of there's multiple players of similar talent levels, whether he's better or worse than the player that he shares the backfield with. But I think it starts there. Why you draft running backs, Alan, is you are hoping they show they belong. Meaning you're going to get what? What have you gotten with Ty Chandler? What have you gotten with Khalil Herbert? You've got multiple years of they're a viable shot in a given year to give me some opportunity, right? They've earned the spot to say, even if the player better than them on their depth chart goes down, they get a chance to hit your lineup once, twice, 4 times, whatever that might be. So I think those are actually the safest players to draft. Now, understand there's probably very little profit that you can turn. Your league mate is not coming to you going, Allen, I have to have Braylon Allen. I'll give you a first rounder. Shy of Breece Hall being retired, nobody's ever going to do that. So the reason why you would draft a player like that is just for the roster construction and just the equity of being able to use them. But I don't think those are the types that burn you. They're actually very safe picks. They either make it or they don't. They may fall to the wayside like a guy like Zach Evans or Tyrion Davis-Price, where they're just not on a depth chart. Then guess what? They're pretty easy to cut in favor of somebody else. So I actually think the rookie running backs, barring you don't pay first round prices, are actually not that detrimental. They're very safe picks. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. And it's, someone that fits that profile, but is totally different than all the others was someone like Dameon Pierce, who was drafted in the 4th round, went in the 1st round of Superflex rookie start. Like he went somewhere between 110 and 2.5. I drafted him in the 1st round. You thought you were right, but the type of rookie, another type of rookie running back that you probably shouldn't be drafting is the round 4 guy who has the clear opportunity today. Because what do we see teams do, Scott? They'll just draft over you. They'll push you out of the way. And the reason you went in round 4 was because you're not elite. You were just a volume guy. Right now, Arian Foster does exist, right? Like that happened. And for those who haven't been playing fantasy football more than a half decade, undrafted free agent, went on to be the number 1 overall pick for multiple years in a row. So how about the type of running back? Now, we talked about the day 3 guys that you're just hoping can get a spot start. How about the day 3 players, the round 3 players, so day 2, that have the immediate opportunity? Are those players that we should be investing into, or is it only to see what we can flip them for on the corner later?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because in this year's class, we really don't have those specific players. We don't really have running backs in this class where you point to, okay, this is a late day 2 or early day 3 pick, but the immediate opportunity is right there. There's a couple. I mean, you can argue that Kamani Vidal has a chance to earn immediate opportunity, but the team will tell you he's probably not atop their depth chart. If anything, he's closer to 4th on their depth chart than he is 1st. So we are biased to thinking that there's immediate opportunity, but I don't think the team views any of these guys. Like you said, they spoke with the draft capital, but even the guys that got good draft capital, Alan Trey Benson went to a team that they're going to run James Conner till the wheels fall off. That's what they want to do. Now, that doesn't mean they don't view Trey Benson as a guy that could be a future James Conner, but I don't think there's any running backs in this class where I go, they do have immediate opportunity, shy of Jonathan Brooks, but I don't even know. There isn't a Dameon Pierce in this class, Alan.
You don't think Blake Corum might be the fit the bill there?
I think they all could.
Right.
But there isn't a running back where I go, that is the best running back on their team right now, combined with the fact they are going to get the most opportunity on their team right now. You can sell me on 3, 4, 5 guys, but it's just not the way the running back position works anymore. So I do think you're shielded in the fact that we aren't drafting the Damian Harris anymore in the late 1st.
Oh,
Pierce, like the guys we're taking in the late 1st is Dameon Pierce in the late 1st. The guys we're taking in the late 1st is Jonathan Brooks. That's it. Where is Benson? Where is Lloyd? Where is Corum? Where are they going? Sometimes you'll see Benson go in the late 1st, early 2nd in like reach circumstances, but generally it's 204 to 210-ish in Superflex.
Yeah, 204 is a fair number, right? And the thing what you mentioned, the thing you mentioned about James Conner is a point that I think we should identify as well, is that, what's the common thing that you hear in your Discord over at the Destination Devy Trades in 5 Discord? You guys hear, well, James Conner, he's going to be gone next year, and Trey Benson's just going to be the guy. I mean, that is, to me, that's a little bit like projecting to the positive, because unless you're a round 1 or early round 2 running back, a lot of times is when James Conner's, quote, gone, they'll just draft another Trey Benson and they'll be in another committee. I mean, that's what we see more often than not.
Well, we did this with Kendre Miller, right? He was a 3rd round pick. Alvin Kamara, he's inevitably going to be suspended / there's no way they keep on his contract. Here we are in year 2, and Kendre Miller, and I'll harken back to last year. I said, sell Kendre Miller for a second. That didn't mean I didn't think he could have the exact role that we think he could have this year. Right. If you've noticed, if you've done some underdog, Alan, Kendre Miller's he rises every week, like more and more people out there going, who is the backup running back this year that could be the league winner? You've probably heard his name mentioned a couple times, right? Oh, and I don't think that's wrong. But to me, that really doesn't ever rise above that value of, all right, it's an early to mid second round value, right? Like, how many running backs are you drafting from this class thinking I am going to easily be able to trade them for a first? Like, it's possible, right? But there's a very limited window. Like, you're going to have to time it perfectly where Trey Benson takes advantage of a James Conner injury, and then he's going to have the James Conner will be gone narrative. And then you're probably going to have to execute that deal before they draft another third or fourth round running back next year, right? That people like. And everyone says next year is an even better running back class. So the RB5 next year could be just as good as Trey Benson this year. So you're going to have maybe a 3 to 6 month window to maybe squeeze a first out of Trey Benson. And that's if your league actually buys into, oh man, he's just going to have the backfield to himself. A lot of dynasty players today go, he's good. He's solid, but, he has the risk of being the next Ken Walker where they just take another guy, and he's really never worth that first, even though it takes a first to pry him away from another manager. It just doesn't feel good. Like, that's what I'm using my first round pick on. I'm blowing my first in February on a running back like Trey Benson that had, this draft capital and is in this situation. It just doesn't feel like it's a great investment if you're saying I want to flip for a profit.
I'm not saying to spend a first on Joe Mixon, but if Joe Mixon is truly a top 8 running back, top 10 running back, and it's Halloween, it's Thanksgiving, and you just need a running back to get you over the top, you feel like you're going to be a Final Four team, I would almost say that that's a better use of your first. Not that you're not overpaying by leaps and bounds. Maybe you get a third back or something like that. But in the season, when we know what's going on, when you're thinking about the immediate future, maybe, that's something I hadn't thought about until you mentioned it, was that it's not just, is this guy worth a first? It's when do you use that first? Do I now, if I use the first on Trey Benson, now I don't have one for when I really need it as an overpay, because if Joe Mixon is a top, 11, top 8 running back, no one's just going to give him up for a second, right? It's just not going to happen in season. You're going to want 2 seconds. So just to automatically get it done, you want that capital, that liquid capital in your bank account. And that's something that I've learned from you guys, because I'm like, why, liquid is good, but I never understood the value of it, because in season is really when you want to spend that liquid capital.
And you can take advantage of the current running back market where people will devalue a guy like Joe Mixon because he already has, and this kind of ties the bow on this whole conversation. Yeah. He's cheaper because he doesn't have any future value. But I think what we're also saying is guys like Trey Benson don't have a lot of future value. They have future equity, right? Yeah. I want to have some Trey Benson just because I may get multiple years of, at worst, the Ty Chandler, Kendre Miller type production. I'm hoping for a lot better than that. But at worst, I'm getting multiple years of, this is a very strong RB that I can start. But we just assume, well, Joe Mixon's old. And, it's funny, Alan, a lot of times, how many times I've bought veterans like that, and you anticipate you're only going to get 1 year out of them? We're on year 4 of James Conner. You know what I mean? Going, man, he's still kicking. He's still actually startable. And that could end at any given moment. He breaks an ankle or something like it's over. But a lot of times when you're buying a guy like Joe Mixon, you sit back and go like, man, I'm getting him for a second in 2022 or 2023. And damn, it's 2026 and he's still playing. Those guys typically are better bets to continue to hold a role like they have, unless they clearly just drop off a cliff. So one deal that I made last year was I traded a first for Joe Mixon and DeAndre Hopkins, right? And the manager just thought, and it was a deeper league, so getting 2 players, it was definitely an overpay from a standpoint of, I'm getting 0 dynasty value. Those are sunk costs. They're stuck on my roster forever. But the other manager goes, I've fallen out of it. I got to get rid of these players because they're about to fall off a cliff. I feel pretty good about those two players going into 2024.
Oh, man,
and I'm working on house money because I already paid the price last year, and I had no incentive to say I'm going to try to recoup. And the amazing thing is if I wanted to recoup, I could probably get a second at least for both of those players. So it's like renting a car to drive it cross country, and then you turn it in and get a refund. It's the same type of thing. So I think sometimes those veterans, because there's bias, are actually better buys, like you said, for a pick. If you can get Joe Mixon and maybe you get a third or something thrown in, you end up getting basically a rental for free.
Yeah, and this is the whole point of this podcast. Like, are rookies overvalued? Because there was one draft, and again, this is just an example of my league, and this is everything broke right where it was the year that Breece Hall was the 1-1. I ended up trading that for Lamar Jackson, who at the time was somewhat distressed. People didn't like him, and then I turned my my first the following year at the time into a 27-year-old Mike Evans and Amari Cooper. It was the first for both of them. And then the next year, like a couple other things went right and I won the league, right? Now I'm not saying you should always do that, but I think that really the overwhelming question I have for you is that are rookie picks overvalued? The answer is yes, right? Until you actually want to sell one, then no one wants to pay for it. So the other day I asked you a question in my draft. I said, I'm on the clock at the 308. Jalen McMillan, the wide receiver in Tampa, or Ray Davis, the running back in Buffalo. And, we could take this conversation a couple different ways, but famously, I mean, it's common dynasty, let's say, theory that you don't draft these like third, fourth, fifth round receivers. You just take the running backs. Is that changing a little bit for you now when you're thinking about what could I do with the pick? I hear you say that phrase a lot. What could I do with the pick? So for the wrong or right type of rookies, you're in the third round. A lot of people don't know who the hell to take, man. Use those two players as an example, but what are the types of players that we should pick? Who's going to be overvalued, and what should we be thinking about 2-3 steps ahead here?
Yeah, it was an interesting question you posed because a year ago I would have told you that's a range I'm just avoiding every possible receiver. They're day 3 receivers. They're very high likelihood of becoming roster cloggers. They're going to be impossible to know when to start. I mean, unless you're in one of these leagues, a 16 team, start 13 or something where the starter threshold is way, way down here, like everybody's a potential starter. But if you're in like a 12 team start 10, 12 team start 11, 10 team start 11, like a lot of people play, the threshold is fairly high at receiver to feel real comfortable about starting that player every single week. Now, we just talked for 15 minutes about the running backs, where if I'm drafting Ray Davis, I'm doing it for a very specific purpose. It is, I believe he'll have a role at some point. But what I'm kind of aiming for, Alan, is he becomes Ty Chandler, Khalil Herbert. Like, he just cements himself as a higher leverage backup that should get some opportunity, and hopefully across his rookie contract gives me, 4 to 6 opportunities to start him in a standalone week because there's an injury ahead of him or circumstances break his way for a short period of time.
Projectable
That's
starts.
It.
Yeah.
Something, yes. And if you tell me I'm getting 4 starts out of Ray Davis, standalone on a good offense where he's going to get 15 plus opportunities, that's worth a third round pick. Even if he doesn't perform in those starts, it would cost me a third round pick to buy one of those guys for 1 week, right? Look to the season. Hey, Deontay Foreman starting this week. What do you have to pay for him probably to get him that week? Probably a third, So getting a Ray Davis, it's just a shortcut to building your roster with cheaper versions of those players before they're actually that. However, when you're thinking Jalen McMillan, you're going, all right, he's a third round receiver drafted to I would say a fairly crowded receiver room right now. They had Trey Palmer last year and then Godwin and Evans. So I don't imagine he's a guy you're going, man, he's getting 5 targets week 1. Like, he's not Jalen Polk. He's not even potentially like Javon Baker, who could get targets right away. There's other receivers where you go, even Luke McCaffrey. Those guys could get opportunity right away. Jalen McMillan probably has to earn it. However, in this league landscape, and I've talked about this a ton on recent pods, of people love their receivers, Alan. If they can look at the hype for Dontavian Wicks, like what do you realistically, if you're in a 12-team start 10, do you really think it's going to be fun to have Dontavian Wicks and decide when to play him this year?
There is nothing worse in fantasy football than the start-sit questions that are all 50-50 bets. I mean, it's bad for the asker, it's bad for the advice giver, because you're going to get them wrong.
Who should I start, Alan? Dontavian Wicks, Jahan Dotson, or how about Pop Douglas? Which one is going to go for 18 points this week? Like that, all of those guys are good players. But unless you're telling me I'm just going to set and forget them in my last flex spot, then they become very difficult to make decisions. But where the benefit could lie is you could have sold Pop Douglas last year for a second, right? You could probably sell Dontavian Wicks right now for a second. From somebody that isn't really paying attention to the, I really don't want Wicks as my wide receiver 9 because I'm not going to get anything out of him. But I like him because everyone's pumping him up. So I'll give you a 2026 second for him. That's going to be probably tough to sell Ray Davis for a 2026 second. And
now,
what do you think
Scott, I want to interrupt you. Explain why to people that you're saying a 2026 when we're only in the year 2024. I believe I understand, but explain to the audience, like, wait a second, isn't that pick 2 years out?
It's 2 years out, but I'm assuming that I'm more likely to be able to pry that away from somebody if they want to get what they want. Sure, I'll try for a 25. I'd probably try even for a better asset, give me a running back in a second or something. But if I have to push it out to 2026, I'm still valuing that for, again, what you talked about, the fungible liquid currency.
Right. You're saying that the average dynasty manager might see 2026 as like putting it on the credit card. I'll worry about the bill when it comes.
Correct. And when you say, all right, hey, James Cook's injured for 3 weeks, Ray Davis is going to be starting, and you try to sell Ray Davis for a 26 second, what's the response probably going to be? What's the analysis on the other end? It's going to look something like, man, he was a day 3 pick. He's never going to take over the backfield. All the same analysis that we already said we really don't care about. That's not our expectation. But it's also going to hurt your trade market most likely, unless there is a long window. I mean, you were barely able now to sell like Jaylen Warren for a second. And that is a guy that has played multiple years and has cemented himself in a role that could be very valuable, right? With some contingent upside because he's proven that he's been an efficient, good running back. Can't get a first for Jaylen Warren. So that's like the best case scenario for a Ray Davis or a Will Shipley. Whereas if people like Jalen McMillan and he just seems to be this year's or this week's big ticket thing, people are throwing around seconds. Yeah. And that's an even bigger example of the reason you would do the McMillan over Ray Davis is just thinking through the plan here is to move the asset. The plan, if I draft Ray Davis, is to use the asset, at least how I would view it. So that's where I just threw it back to you. Know your league, Alan. Okay. Is your receiver market, is this the kind of league where if you had Dontavian Wicks, you can flip him for a second? If you say there's no way, nobody's active here, everyone's conservative with their picks, that's probably not the league I'm drafting a bunch of Luke McCaffreys and Jalen McMillans, because if they're not usable for you, what do you actually have? They're not flexible assets.
This is the point that I want to underline for anyone listening to this, because you said it eloquently, but it deserves an underline that you're drafting the running backs to use, you're drafting the receivers in that range to profit on, to sell right now. And it also has to do with recent history, right? We can also say, hey, this year's Tank Dell, right? Imagine that McMillan comes out and has a 6 for 80 and a touchdown week 1, right? That's it, right? Now you're going to hear the advice. Everyone's on social media. You're going to hear sell McMillan for a second, sell McMillan for a first. And then it's interesting debate, right? Because I'm sure you were caught up in the hysteria where, all right, sell Puka Nacua for a third. Okay, sell him for a second. Okay, sell him for 2 seconds. And eventually, oh, you're an idiot. You paid a first? Right. Now, I was the idiot that paid a first. Now, it was right, but maybe, the roulette wheel landed on my number. I mean, that's just basically how it is. So I think that's the takeaway here. The types of rookies that are that are like, let's say, overrated might be the running backs. And that's a shift from our mindset not too long ago, Scott Connor.
Well, we have other examples too. We have guys from the last couple of years. Romeo Dobbs. There was a point during his first year you were able to get a second. He was a 4th round receiver, or I think, he's a 4th round receiver that nobody really liked much. But I remember I bought some Romeo Dobbs for seconds. I sold some Romeo Dobbs for a second, but that was a player that showed enough early on that kind of rose above where he was drafted. But the odds that he goes higher than that is pretty low. But we've seen many examples. They're not the Puka Nakuas or even Tank Dells. Those are just the sweetener, where you'll draft some of these guys, and if you hit on one of those guys, and it was one of the guys you drafted a ton of, like McMillan or McCaffrey or Javon Baker, you're just printing money at that point, Alan. If you win all in on Puka last year, even if you held half of them, if you sold half for a first, but you held the other half, you're through the roof. You know what I mean? You're feeling awesome about that investment. But Bitcoin. Even the floor could just be, hey, I flipped for 2/3. I paid 308 and I flipped for 2/3. And it's just because we're living in a robust wide receiver market where everybody thinks every receiver that is young, that has showed something or that has some small role at least, is just going to last for a long time. And my theory is that a lot of those receivers just get churned and burned even quicker than the running backs because there's so many of them, but the market hasn't caught up to that yet.
Yep. You said that you love playing blackjack, right? I heard you say that. Or yep. Yeah, me too. Yes. So, but flipping, the reason I'm asking is that, you flip Puka for a second when that happens. It's like you've been at a blackjack table and there's some dude next to you who's losing on just say like $50 hands. And then he just says, let me just go light on this hand, puts $5 in, hits the blackjack and is mad that he won because he's not betting his big. So that was selling Puka for a second. The people that paid a 5th round rookie pick for him and then sold him for a second with a $5 guy hitting the blackjack. When you hit blackjack and you win, you got to be happy and take those winnings. It's not in human nature. Scott, you ever play PrizePicks?
I have not, no.
Okay.
Not eligible to play it where I live.
Oh, that's why. Okay. But PrizePicks, sponsor of the RotoWire Dynasty podcast here. Our code is RotoPod, ROTOPOD. Deposit match up to $100. It's one of the pick sites. And by the way, PrizePicks, I mean, if you read about it, they're booming business right now. I mean, they are just, beyond blowing up. Everybody's played already where you pick more or less than a certain projection. Some of the season-long projections on there right now. I want everyone to go over to PrizePicks, download the app, ROTOPOD, RotoPod, get you double match. And the reason I bring up PrizePicks, not only are they a great sponsor of this podcast, Scott, RotoWire just released a picks tool today. So we'll put the link for that. You can download it on Android. You can download it on Apple, our picks tool. I forget how much it is in the App Store, but it uses the RotoWire projections, and then it also grades how we've done against those picks. If you're new to playing PrizePicks, Sleeper, or Underdog, or any of those, the RotoWire picks tool, man, it's back tested, beta tested. So go check that out. I will put a link in here. You can just go to the App Store and check it out. Also, Scott, this podcast is brought to you by Circa Las Vegas. Well, when's the last time you were out in Vegas?
Every September, I go out for the draft weekend right during the opening weekend of the season. And I think from listening to the previous shows, you guys are going out earlier, right? Going out in the summer?
Yes.
July, right?
Mm-hmm. July. We go RotoWire gambling.com, very generous. That's our parent company. They're bringing us out to Vegas. We stay at the Circa. We are staying for 3 or 4 days. They take care of you. And they are a sponsor of the podcast, full disclosure, but they have something called the Ultimate Draft Experience. You go to circalasvegas.com, Scott, and they will pick you up from the airport in a limousine, your whole league, right? Bring you over there, set you up in the cabana, the big draft board, the girls bringing drinks, the private blackjack, the whole thing, man. It's the ultimate draft experience. It's pretty sick. So if you want to go out to Vegas, Circa is the ultimate sports lover's dream, and the sports book, there's nothing like it. So circalasvegas.com. Next time you go out there, Scott, I would certainly recommend going to check out their sports book. I'm here with Scott Connor, and we are talking about overrated rookie types and what we should be looking for, what the market likes, and I just want to try to understand rookie hype a little bit here. What are some of the factors, Scott, you think that lead to rookie hype? Now, this might seem like an obvious question for you, but I think if we identify those factors, people can be a little bit more aware and sober themselves up a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is something we've talked a ton about at Destination Devy, and I really haven't. You and I have talked about it. We've talked about it on Trades in 5. We talked about it pretty much anywhere both of us have an audience, is this idea of like sentiment or likability, and how do we quantify that? And I think it starts, Alan, with do people like the rookie to begin with? Are they inclined to be talking about whatever player you're inserting into this discussion? Are they already talking about that player to start? Like, it feels like there's some rookies in this class that haven't had a lot of buzz, but you're just waiting for when they do, your timeline's going to be full of people going, hell yeah, I knew that guy was good. I knew he was going to assert himself on this depth chart. I knew he was going to come right in and look good.
Give me an example.
I mean, Braylon Allen's one that's already gotten the hype.
Right, he's gone up, down, up again.
Yeah, and he's somebody that I think his situation is very much like it is what it is. But the best case scenario was he cemented himself as the clear RB2. And now that he has, you're kind of going like, okay, now I'm maybe motivated to move off the fact that if people think he's going to be more than that, then I'd be willing to move. But there's some others. I mean, we're probably still waiting for some of the receivers. Jermaine Burton is one where people like Jermaine Burton. A lot of people saying he was the second, third, fourth best receiver in the class. Just he had the off the field stuff. But just wait, Allen, until we are 2 weeks into training camp and T. Higgins isn't there. Right. And it's Joe Burrow or Jermaine Burton, and we don't even need T. Higgins anymore.
Right. And he's leaving next year, Skies. He's going to be a free agent, right? He's
leaving next year. But that's one where, again, if his name was, let me think of another example. If his name was like,
I mean, like a vanilla type of guy, you're saying? Like
I'll give another example. A guy that's maybe a tier lower, but if his name was Tez Walker,
right.
Man, Tez Walker's looking good in Ravens camp. It would not elicit the same excitement. Don't you agree? Even though they were really not that far apart in terms of where they got drafted. I mean, Burton was pick 80, Walker was pick 113. So we're talking 33 picks apart.
So I want to
Don't you feel that there's a narrative you can sell on one versus can you see a world where the Tez Walker hype is going to be so much where everybody has to have him?
So tell me you're in 40 Dynasty rookie drafts without telling me you're in 40 Dynasty rookie drafts. This is a Pete right here. Just knowing that who will pop with hype and who won't is why, if you're someone that's not in a lot of leagues, and that's okay. Like I respect that too, because it's hard to be in a lot of leagues. These are the type of things that you do gain. Now, is it worth being in 40 leagues and giving yourself a headache? I'm not sure, but I just want to point out that statement is hilariously true about Tez Walker won't pop. And the only reason you know that is because where he goes in these rookie drafts, and you could just say, look at the ADP, but there's no like, oh, you sniped me. You never hear that after Tez Walker was picked.
Yeah. And it stems from all the way back to, remember at the Senior Bowl when he had the drops and it was, we thought he was going to go in the first or second round and then he goes in the fourth. Allen, he goes to the Ravens, historically not a place people fall in love with the next receiver up. Hell, people don't even really like their only good receiver on their team. I don't know about Zay Flowers. You know what I mean? Whereas there's some of these other teams, like Bengals could have 3 receivers that people like. It's just the bias of the situation. Then you have the player itself. And then you have the fact that you just probably can't see the narrative for somebody like Tez Walker like you could for Jermaine Burton. So those 3 things, and that has zero to do with their projectability. So that's one. Troy Franklin's another one. There's a lot that could happen in Denver. People love the name Troy Franklin. He fell in rookie drafts, but again, or he fell in the NFL draft, but again, what have dynasty managers said about his fall in the rookie draft? Don't care, right? He still goes in the range where you're going, man, Troy Franklin or this receiver that went in the mid-second round.
Dude,
and historically, I've seen him you'd go, that's an awful bet. But
over Xavier Legette, who went in the first round. Like, I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen.
Yes. So that's one that I don't even like Troy Franklin. I hated where he landed. I hated the fact that he fell to the 4th. But all you had to tell me is he landed with Bo Nix and he landed in a receiver room that nobody likes any of the other players.
Yeah.
That's it. So that's why I clicked some Troy Franklin in drafts. And I can probably give you 3 or 4 examples where there's other scenarios where these players could just have hype out of nowhere. So
this Troy Franklin thing, we need to discuss this. So, he went in the quote 4th round. He was the 2nd pick of the 4th round. Why do you think this is the proverbial draw this like arbitrary line at the 4th round? Like if he went 3 picks earlier, he's a 3rd round pick. Like, why isn't it, hey, this guy's a 1st round pick, this guy's a 2nd round pick after 1.20 in the real NFL draft? Is there really a lot of difference between Keon Coleman and whoever draft capital and Xavier Worthy, right? I mean, draft capital wise, it's kind of the same. It's within the same 15 picks. So why do we, the question is, why do we draw these arbitrary lines? And I guess it kind of works. You say he's a 4th round pick. He was 2 picks away from being a 3rd round pick, Franklin.
Because we zoom out and we look at anecdotal data from the past and say, largely, these are the ranges you prefer to have a player drafted. But then if you zoom in and you look at maybe the reason why, teams only get 1 pick per round, right?
Yeah.
Like with receivers, teams only get 1 pick per round. NFL teams also don't view receivers like we do in Dynasty. We see the term receiver. A team looks at Tez Walker and goes, he's a very specific type of receiver. But the team in the 3rd round that drafted, Malachi Corley was not probably comparing him to Tez Walker, right? They're not even on the same board. So to say, the Jets passed on Tez Walker for Malachi Corley, they probably weren't looking for Tez Walker.
Interesting.
Whereas the teams that passed on Corley might not have been looking for that type. So I think with receiver, and the same goes for running back. Like your teams are not looking for a running back. They're looking for a complementary running back, right? Audric Estime is not the same as Bucky Irving, but they went very similar in terms of where they went in the NFL draft. They went 20 picks apart, but to say, Denver passed on Bucky Irving or Tampa Bay passed on Audric Estime to get Bucky Irving. Were they even looking for an Audric Estime? You know what I mean? So I think we look at this draft capital, we zoom it out, we ignore some of the individual nuances of players and why maybe they're not all created the same. Not every running back is the same. Not every receiver the same. Hell, Tip Ryman went in the 3rd round. Have you ever seen anybody draft him, Alan? And that's just because the narrative is he's a blocker. Right. And then yet people are racing to draft Jared Wiley and Cade Stover in every draft. But Tip Ryman, he's on waivers in most of my leagues.
I was saying he wasn't even picked up.
He's on waivers.
Yeah, he wasn't even picked up, right? And, you could easily see, hey, in a best ball format where you don't have to pick the week he's going to go off, if he's on the field, he'll score 3 touchdowns this year, perhaps, right? I mean,
probably.
Yeah, that should crack your lineup in some deeper formats. So you seem very sober about you said in the beginning about flipping rookies, not getting attached to names. What do you think are some strategies that dynasty managers could use to not overpay for rookies?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what you mentioned at the beginning with the fungibility and the liquidity of picks. Use your picks as money to live your life, right? There's going to be times where you want to have enough money in the bank account to take your significant other out to a nice dinner or splurge for a weekend getaway. Or, hey, I was sitting out on my deck the other day, Alan, doing an underdog draft, and you know what I decided I needed? One of those retractable awnings.
Because it's too sunny, right? To do the draft.
Covers me. And do I really need that? Do I need to go spend $400 and then another $400 for somebody to install it on my house? No. But I go, you know what? This is going to give me 100 days this summer and fall of being able to sit outside without battling the sun or the wind or whatever. So right there, it's worth it. Yeah. And that's only because I have a little extra money in the bank and I can drop $400 to buy that awning. It's the same way with draft picks. Like I purposely play in a lot of leagues. Otherwise, I would get attached to players. You're in 40 plus leagues. I'm in 40 plus leagues. If you removed us and said, all right, Alan, every dime you spend in Dynasty, you have to go put into one league. So all your buy-ins go out of your 40 plus leagues and they go into one league. And you're dropping thousands on one league, and you only get 4 draft picks a year.
Right.
You're going to probably be a lot more calculated with how you use those picks, right? You ain't trading them for DeAndre Hopkins and Joe Mixon in February. You're going, all right, man, I got to hold on to this pick. I got to shop around for the best deal. But you're also, what are you going to be able to do if you only have that one league? You're going to be able to zoom in on every team. You're going to be able to shop around all year for that one purchase that you're going to make with that first round pick. We don't have the luxury of doing that. We have to play the percentages. We have to play the odds. We have to take shares of all these different players, diversify. So a lot of the strategies we're talking about lend more towards the way we're playing, but they're also optimal because we just don't have the time to zoom in and truly make the optimal decision in a dynasty league is to go in and research every move made by every one of your league mates for the last 5 years. Whereas I know exactly what Allen's going to do. I know how he trades. I know how he plays waivers. I know how he uses his draft picks. I don't have time for that. I barely have time to even understand like the optimal scoring and roster construction in my leagues, let alone get a handle on what all other 11 managers are doing. So I think this just leads to we have to cast a wide net. We have to play percentages. If you tell me a third round receiver is only going to net me a profit 15% of the time, I'm going to be selective on when I take third round receivers, but I'm not going to take 0. I'm going to take 25%. I'm going to lean into the odds that are in my favor. But that kind of leans towards how we're talking about playing with taking different bets and diversifying, etc.
When you are making these draft picks, I've heard you talk about roster construction, and the way roster construction works is the number of each position. I mean, that's basically what we're talking about here. Now, just general 10,000-foot view. Does the way you draft rookies play into your roster construction, or for any of those that follow you or that have heard about roster construction, do you just take what you think is the best player? So really what I'm trying to do is say, or ask you here is, you're player agnostic, but you get a little bit more player specific when you're drafting in a rookie draft to stick to your roster construction.
Yeah, great question. So I think the key is to always make every draft pick with some sort of purpose. I've leaned away from strict roster construction rules because it creates constraints for you where you may miss out on players, the Tank Dells, right? I didn't draft Tank Dell last year. I had 1 share of Tank Dell across 46 leagues. And that's because why? Man, I probably built my teams around these quote-unquote threshold receivers, and Tank Dell just didn't fit the mold of the type of player I was drafting. So that's a lesson learned on I was too constricting on these rules that I set in place for roster construction. Man, Alan, I'm probably drafting a roster clogger if I draft Tank Dell. So I'm just going to skip over him and ignore all this other hype about CJ Stroud loved him and he's probably going to get opportunity early on. I ignore all that because what are the odds I get burned by not taking him? Sure, somebody else can have him. Maybe he ends up being a usable player, but you learn from that. So to your point, like if I go in, I just had my last rookie draft this past weekend, my last 2 rookie drafts this past weekend, actually. And I had some 3rd round picks. And when I get on the clock, and this speaks definitely to like 3rd and 4th round picks, but even 2nd round picks, you're looking at, okay, who's available? If it's not an obvious pick, the second thing I ask myself is, do I need to make this pick?
Right.
I want to make every pick. It's fun to hit draft and go through and go, ooh, Will Shipley. I don't have a lot of him. Yeah. I really would love to get another share of Will Shipley or Ray Davis or even guys that are a little bit lower than that, just to take your shots, to say I have some exposure to Dylan Lobb or whatever it might be. But I ask myself, do I need to make this pick? And if my gut says, you know what, I really don't have a need to add a 12th running back here or add a backup quarterback here or add another receiver like Luke McCaffrey, because I think I can flip him for a second later on. Okay, can I move this pick to the future? And that's been a move that a lot of people struggle with, Alan. If I said, what's the 305 worth and all you got was a future 3rd, what would you say? Scott, you didn't get enough. Right. Someone got to make a pick, and all they had to do is give you a future 3rd for a 305. Not a 310, not a 312, not a 402. Dude, you gave him the 305. And it wasn't because I thought I'm winning that deal. It's because I just didn't feel for my construction that I needed to make a pick. And that is discipline. And that is, I know down the road in this specific league, and I'm weighing the fact, okay, what does a 3rd mean in my league? Does a 3rd get me a deal done later in the year that means a lot more than me drafting Will Shipley right here or me drafting Luke McCaffrey right here? So to have that discipline to shop the pick and say, you know what, 308 on the block for any future 3rd, first to send it gets it. I did 30 deals like that this year where I just didn't want to make the pick. If I want to make the pick, it's probably because I see, oh, okay, Ray Davis is still on the board. I could use another strong handcuff running back on this team because I'm maybe lacking in that department. I could use an asset that maybe can turn into a higher valued asset. So I'll go ahead and draft Javon Baker here, or I'll go ahead and draft Roman Wilson here, or Jermaine Burton here, wherever that pick might fall. But that's the analysis. I'm not looking at, okay, it has to fit my specific roster construction. I'm looking for the short-term, what's my plan? And if there's no short-term plan that I can identify, I'm moving the pick to use in season.
Yeah, and this is a very important point, because if you don't want to make the pick, let's say you even had 3 or 4, no one you like is on the board, and the guy who's giving you next year's third, it's clearly 308 to the end, right? That third, I just want to remind people, last year in 2023, these are the players that you could have bought with the 3rd round pick, and I say you could have because I did. I bought Joe Flacco for a 3rd. I bought Jake Browning for a 3rd. And at one point, I bought Gardner Minshew for a couple 3rds, right? Where it was like a 3rd and a 4th. So think about it. Would you rather have Will Shipley or any of the names that you rattled off? Or if I hate, we joke about the term league winner. Joe Flacco actually was that. He got you. He was a difference maker at the quarterback position. Joe Flacco. I mean, that's it. And now it's to the point where where he's now a desired backup in 2024.
Correct. Have you ever had a deal, Alan, fall through because someone goes, I need 2 thirds, and you don't have any thirds?
Oh, I mean, too often. I used to.
And you're going, man, I'll give you my 26th third, but my 27th third isn't available yet. And they go, sorry, your competitor over there has 5 thirds, and he's willing to give me 2 of those and a 4th.
People say all the time, thirds don't matter.
The difference.
Yep. Yeah. People say thirds. I have a buddy of mine that always says, "Oh, thirds that doesn't move the needle for me." Today it doesn't. So this is the thing that I can honestly say that I've learned from you guys over there at Destination, Devy, and at Dynasty Trades of 5 is that 3rd round picks matter. Maybe not today, but they're deal closers. They're sweeteners. They're finishers, right? They're the goal line back for a football analogy. So.
And I'll tell on myself, Alan. I'm looking right now. So in my 46 leagues, guess how many thirds I have next year? Already.
I listen to your content, so I know.
It's more.
Okay, I was going to say 87
rounders already.
Okay, I was going to say 87. 90.
So
wait, I may have stepped on you. How many 3rd round picks do you have across your league? You just said it, and I may have talked over you.
No, yeah. So 46 leagues, I have 90 thirds already collected for 2025. And so, a lot of those are my own that I've kept, but I've also added, an additional 44 in trades.
Right.
Now, here's the flaw and people have pushed back on me on this. Thirds are useless. You'll see those comments all the time in chats. You know what I mean? Yeah, thirds don't move the needle. Thirds are worthless. I put out a video on Dynasty Portfolio Weekly where I was talking about this theory, and somebody just puts in the comments, nobody wants thirds, bro. That's the kind of comments you get. Now, I don't disagree, but I'm going to ask you this question. I know you're the host, but I'm going to ask you this question. How do I get out of the habit of just continuing to kick these cans forward and say, oh, Alan, because a lot of times, whether you use the third or not in season, comes down to A, are you interested in moving any picks for players, right? Your team just may not be in a spot where you're interested in that. B, what if I didn't need the Joe Flacco or the Jake Browning? A lot of times it's going to be quarterbacks and running backs that are probably going to be what you're buying short term for those thirds, right? Maybe you'll add a couple thirds to a deal to get a bigger deal done. But what if I go through a league and I just don't need to use those thirds during the season for one reason or another? All of a sudden, I go into next year with 5 of them. 3 of them I'm trying to trade for future thirds. Are you okay with just continuing to kick the can and go, at some point, I'll need them, but instead I'm just going to take basically neutral pivots off of them for future picks? Because I have run into that. For 2 years, I've been telling myself, dude, spend those freaking thirds during the season. And here's the thing, even if I don't need that spot start running back in week 5, wisdom says buy him anyway for a third.
Right.
Because I may need him in week 8, and it may not be that I can't get him in week 8, but I might have more competition to get him in week 8. Should I just spend the third on the guy that could have the opportunity? Do you see what I'm saying? Should I just do that and just get it out of the way and liquidate some of those thirds to make sure I'm casting a wider net to try to win during the season?
Yeah, there's 2 schools of thought on this, and this is a topic that I've thought about, so I like that you're bringing it up and posing it back to me, is that, there's one philosophy that says, I'd rather pay more when I know I need them, and then there's the other philosophy that says, hey, I can get this on sale now, right? And the analogy would be toilet paper during COVID, right? I mean, that's the funny analogy, right? I mean, it was $14 a roll if you can get it, or 10 cents a roll now. Also, like leftover Chinese food, how many times do you save the rice that you don't eat and then it just goes in the garbage 10 days later anyway? So I like taking a few. I like spending some of that, or else it goes bad, right? At some point, the rice in the refrigerator goes bad. Roshan Johnson, if he's like inactive or gets two carries, that's someone that you may have liked. And you can go down the list of names. So I think at some point buying them, and then because there's also that chance, Scott, that you buy the RB3 on a team and then for a fourth instead of a third, and then you can at least, well, then you're back to the beginning again where you have another third instead of a player. But yeah, at some point though, it's okay to also overpay, right? Like I have no aversion to overpaying in Dynasty, especially if I have too many of these things sitting in my coffer, right? And if you need someone, so a player's worth barely a third, I'll give you a third. Or if you have multiple thirds and you don't want to give the one that's projected to be the 303, and you want to give the guy the one the 3010, it's okay to overpay because you don't need to win every trade. You just need to make your team better during that week. During that, I mean. That's my philosophy on it. It's okay to spend, especially if you've built up a supply. You don't want to make a habit of it, but I'm okay overpaying.
How do you balance that out? Like you look at a roster where, because this is leaned into the theory of, it's for a different show, but I've done some podcasts talking about this wide receiver saturation. There's so many of them, right? But let's say you look at a team and it's a typical start 10 lineup league where it's 30-man rosters, right? But you look at your running backs and you kind of smile when you see your RBs. You have a Khalil Herbert, you got a Chuba Hubbard. They're just kind of chilling on your bench. You already have the reinforcements that you think you may need, even though you don't need today. But you also have 3 or 4 third-round picks. Like when do you say, you know what? I already have 9 running backs that I think I could use this year. I don't need to buy a 10th, even though there's a deal for a player on the table where I can get him for a third today. Where do you draw that line to where, because like we always want to operate with enough to win, but not too much to where we're winning, we're leaving value on the table. It's having the cake and eating it too. We want to win, but I've gotten a lot of wins over the years in Dynasty. Now I'm like, I want to win, but I want to do it on even slimmer margins so that I can continue to build value and build Dynasty value going forward. How do you draw that line when you look at a specific roster? Because I'm sure you have some where you go, dude, I'm flush at running back here. Like the last thing I'm doing is paying for Deontay Foreman when I have no clue whether he's going to have a role. Then another league, you're like, dude, I'd love for somebody to throw me a lifeline on one of these guys today for a third,
Yeah, I love when you talk about the insurance business because you're in it, and overinsuring, underinsuring. I rather always be overinsured, especially if I'm a contender. So if I have these thirds there, right, and just because it's like week 11, we're coming to the stretch run here, Scott, right? Like you just never know when it might seem like you're loaded in week 11, and then week 14 hits, and you're like, oh my God, 3 of my running backs are dead. My backup Baker Mayfield's out for 2 weeks. He was my QB2. And then all of a sudden you're happy. So it's like you have too much stock and then you don't have enough. I'd rather it expire on my roster than be unprepared, right? I mean, I'd rather the food spoil in the fridge than be without food at all. So I'm okay. Again, you don't. Yeah, so it's okay sometimes to have these to not always get future value if you're going into a situation where, and again, this is more contender based, playoff team based. I know some dynasty philosophies. If you're not a top 2 or 3 or 4 team, you should just like get out. In fantasy football, I've seen the 6 seed, the 5 seed win it, and with not great teams either, right? It happens. So it's okay to have it, especially if your league allows trading. And let's say this year, I'll give you an example. There's no way you would pay a 2nd round pick for Alexander Madison. Let's say he gets a clarified start in week 15 in your wild card playoff matchup. It's okay. It's okay if you're carrying 6 of them next year. At some point, you gotta, this is why you saved up for a rainy day. All right. It might not be the ideal payout, but it's okay. I paid a 2nd for Foreman last year in a critical week. And now I'm like, man, 205. That was like, in some leagues, that was Michael Penix, a future starting quarterback. Now I have Deontay Foreman. I mean, it's like, it's okay. Now, again, today, that's a bad a bad outcome. But at the time, Deontay Foreman in that specific week got me onto the next round, and I finished third in that league. I got my money back. So at least it wasn't a loss that year.
I do think that is a very key point that might be lost in this is understanding, do you have a trade deadline? How active is your league? Like those things are huge, right? Those things are going to be drivers of how aggressive I'm going to be to get the insurance before everybody knows I need the insurance. Because once you know you need it, you know,
You're
in
screwed.
the insurance world, you can't insure something that's already been blown away or that's already been destroyed, right? But it's the same with your league. As soon as they see, oh man, Allen's 9-1 and only has one QB, right? All of a sudden, the cost of the backup Jake Browning for Joe Burrow now costs Allen more, or at least you're going to have to work the room a little better to get the deal done at the previous price because it's clear that you have a need and you need it in a very specific time frame. So I think those things matter too. The trade deadline stuff, you know, if I'm in the middle, like if I'm the 5 or 6 seed and I think I have a shot to make the playoffs, that's the kind of team where I'm going to try to win on the slimmest of margins, right? I'm going to trim my roster down to only what I need. And guess what? If a couple of those players go down, I can justify saying it was just not in the cards.
Dude.
But if there's no trade deadline, I can run that right up to the deadline. Hey, I'm in the playoffs. I didn't think I'd be, but it's week 15. I made the playoffs. I'm the 6th seed. I have that second that I refused the deal all year until I know I'm in the playoffs. Now it's open season. Who wants it? And I think without a deadline, you can hold that up to the very end. Whereas if you have a trade deadline, week 13, 14, you'd have to make that decision earlier.
Yeah. I paid a 3rd and a 4th and Tyson Bagent last year for Jeff Wilson and Alexander Madison. I lost. You know, I mean, I felt good because I had, so that's an example to the other side, right? Like where I overinsured. I've heard you talk about that concept and it was just a bad bet. So I don't know, man. I think that we all believe we have it figured out, but think about how much your dynasty philosophy, Scott, as we finish up this podcast has changed from 2 years. What the hell is it going to be in 2 years from now, right? So, all right, everybody. Scott Connor, he's not here for his health. He's here to, I know you enjoy being here, Scott, but you're here to tell everybody about some of the important pieces of dynasty fantasy football, things that you're working on that I'm sure that they want to check out. So I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell everyone about 1 or 2 of the most important things they should check out if they're just finding you for the first time on the RotoWire podcast.
Well, Alan, it's a pleasure of always chop it up with you on the show. Thank you for having me on. Charles Chill, FFB. There's always tweets and links to everything we're doing at Destination Devy and Dynasty Trades in 5. That's where you'll find everything. DestinationDevy.com, Patreon.com/allgas. That's where our community is. Alan's a part of our community. He's active in there. That's what it's all about. I'm not doing this for, you know, we both have full-time jobs. Like this isn't our lifeblood, you know what I mean? But we love it. This is why we're here midday on a Wednesday afternoon to talk about it. So find me over there. It's all about community. I'm usually just talking about my theories. And I'll leave everybody with this. You asked me, or you have rhetorically asked, how are we going to be playing Dynasty in 2 years?
Yeah.
That's what drives me, right? That is what drives me and you to continue the conversations that we have. You host the Trades in 5 and 5 with us, where we're talking a lot about not just players, but kind of future projections on how we're going to be playing. Because the more content like this, people become better at the game. Yeah. I had my window where I was kind of on the cutting edge, right? Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where a lot of my theories, people are going like, what are you talking about? Any running back on a 53, hoard the backup QBs, care about war and roster construction. That's becoming mainstream. Like there's people in my league that go, oh, hey, I listened to your show. I'm not taking that deal. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to sell me that roster clogger receiver for any liquidity so that you can go pick up a running back on waivers. I know what you're trying to do.
Right. You're selling them Jerry Judy for a third so you can go get, you know, Jeff Wilson last year or whoever it was last year. I keep using
when
that
people
name.
Respond to your comments or your trade offers with the exact theory that you preached of why I would want to do this deal, that person is already in the hive, right? I'm never probably going to use my strategies on them unless they just see the situation or they are impulsively wanting to get what I have. But I'm not going to look at them and go, okay, this is the guy that's just going to inefficiently roster construct and make draft picks and stuff. Like How am I going to beat this player? I'm now looking at this player as a kind of another version of my mind. And I have to think of, okay, what's the next way? And as soon as you start noticing 7 or 8 people in your league that are doing that, all of a sudden your strategies become nullified. They're neutralized. So now I'm sitting here thinking, okay, what is the next trend or thing that is going to happen? And practice what I preach. Ray and I talk about that all the time. I practice what I preach. Even if it's maybe slightly contradictive to what I'm saying is the optimal. It's like, dude, the optimal isn't working anymore in my leagues because people are literally following what I'm doing and playing it against me. So it's a rhetorical question. I won't answer it today, but that's what our community is all about, is solving those answers and acting on them.
Yeah. And it's at some point when you're doing football podcasts and you have to make that decision, are you going to be a content creator or are you going to be, a professional player? Because, you see in all the time in these high stakes, like FFPC, NFFC, those guys aren't doing podcasts. In fact, they get pissed if their names are on the draft board publicly, right? Because they don't want you to know that they're even taking Chris Olave
The
5 spots.
The best ones are anonymous.
Yeah, right.
Truthfully.
So here's the
us
best
that are out there talking about it, but then also going, hey, I'm going to go try to play against them. When you listen enough of my content, you probably can figure out what I'm trying to do. Now, I'm not a player guy. You get an underdog draft or an FFPC draft with me, Alan, you know how I'm going to roster construct. You just know. Right. So I don't have an edge doing that anymore if you're putting it out there publicly. So that's a great point.
Scott Connor, you did it again, baby. All right, everybody. We'll be back next week with another Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast.